And it was like a trigger for me where I was like, I jumped in and I was like, make sure you keep asking questions. Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Graeme.
And this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast. This is episode number 11 in season 2 here. Graeme, you and I were just chatting about communication and different modes of communication, the effectiveness, all that sort of stuff, because in companies with people that are everywhere and different roles, you got different ways to communicate, and different people find different things effective.
Some of us don't like being called out of the blue, but some of us do. And I think there is a whole spectrum of things in between and ways that you can think effectively about how you're going to engage people and use their time. I think, for me, there's no right or wrong, but I certainly think there is some level of intention and consciousness that needs to be applied to use of other people's time and how we can kind of get where we're trying to go as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely. And through our conversation, there's a couple takeaways that I'm going to try to implement. It's easier said than done, but I think I should try and practice them. So I think there's some really good takeaways. If you want to do us a favor, like and subscribe to the channel. Sit back and enjoy, because I think there's a lot of interesting insights in this one for you. So we'll see you next time. Because I have been going into the office more, and on my previous team, I found that because my entire team was remote, there was almost no reason for me to go into the office ever. So I've been living the work from home dream, so to speak, and switching to this team. It's kind of cool. Like, there are people that go into the office, some of them pretty regularly, including my boss. And so I've been trying to go in on Wednesdays. And I just mentioned before, like, I'm going to try to start going in twice a week. And today was super cool because it was one of those experiences that I haven't had in so long, where you just like start talking about something and it's like pretty important and you start uncovering details. And we were talking for like almost 3 hours, like pretty nuts. And we were probably about 2 hours in, and another principal engineer like came into the office, and he's part of like what we were discussing. So he jumped in and we just kept going. And it was like, if we wouldn't have been having that conversation, we wouldn't have unpacked so much stuff. And it would have been, I feel like it, not that it's impossible that it could have happened over chat, but I just don't think it would have happened naturally like that. So that's definitely something I miss with so much work from home.
The casual, natural encounters are much harder. Yeah. Your story is interesting because it's different than, I think it's different. One of the things people tried to do when everybody went remote was like replicate like scenarios to allow for those natural encounters, because those were so important to developing. And I think that's where things fall apart. But if you are just saying it wasn't intentional, but look, it was an example of when those natural conversations can be beneficial. Like I totally get that. And I certainly miss those kinds of interactions as well. You learn something different.
Yeah, I find like in person, there's like that one, we weren't at a whiteboard or anything. Just did one of the typical things. You remember working at Magnet and just like turning to each other in our cubes kind of thing? It was exactly like that. I was like, I had an email on my screen from the person that was sitting beside me. And I said, hey, do you got a second? Like, because I actually don't know how to answer your email. I wanted to chat through it and see what your perspective was, because they were asking me a question. So I was like, I want to hear about this. And she had said, like, yeah, like I basically brought this up because she's like, I don't really know the answer. And like, I just figured we should talk about this. So I'm like, great, this is what we're going to do then. And then we just kept talking and we kept uncovering more and more. And it was interesting because reading the email, I don't get this feeling from her. But when you read the email, it's kind of like the way it's phrased is like, hey, like Nick, it's almost like expecting you're going to answer this. Like you probably have thoughts on this, looking forward to your answer. That's kind of how it felt, right? So that's why I wanted to talk to her, to be like, hey, I actually don't know the answer. And as we started talking, we realized like neither of us know the answer. It's not really what she was expecting of me. And it was really about, I think we should try to get everyone talking about this, because I don't think we're all saying the same thing. So it was just really cool to have that naturally kind of come up. And yeah, I like I said, I feel like if it was just reading emails, I might have responded and been like, do I try to create an answer that I'm not really confident about? Like, I don't know. I don't know how I would have navigated it.
What I think what you highlighted for me is like one of the return to home. I love being at home. Return to office uh things that people are doing is like you must be in the office a certain number of days a week, but they don't
Yeah.
necessarily say when. And what I think is so ludicrous is the idea that you have to go into the office, but if other people who you work closely with don't come in on the same day, you're going to sit on Zoom calls in the office instead of at home. And I find that so wild. But I like you've hit upon a situation where going into the office and having people around worked and makes sense.
Yeah.
But it might be nothing more than a chance encounter if there isn't some intention behind it, which is exactly what I love about. And I'm not going to say we're doing this. I'm not sure who has. I'm sure there's examples
Sure.
out, but nailing the hybrid model of putting some intentionality behind in-person face-to-face meetings. And I think that actually I think that works at multiple levels. I think that cascades. There's like putting intention behind we're far apart, but someone's got to get on a plane for some amount of time spent together because we must have that. And maybe that's an
Yep.
annual company thing. Maybe that's a team offsite. But then you have like the not in physical in person, but synchronous. Hey, we got to get on a Zoom call to talk about this. And I
Yeah.
think even to do that requires some level of like intentionality about why you want people co-located and talking at the same time, whether it's like
Yep.
physical space or virtual. And then it's very opposite to kind of the asynchronous. We're not doing this at the same time, so we have to change our patterns. And I think the
Right.
people who nail hybrid are the ones that really understand that and know what that intentionality like threshold is to do the different types of activities, and not just, oh,
Yeah.
if we co-locate or share physical space, we will have more chance encounters and better brainstorming will happen.
Yeah. And you said it really well too. Like, because there are different levels, it's not you just nail one of them. Like, if you're going hybrid, you have this opportunity where you can basically do a good job of all of them. If you were only in office or only working from home, there's going to be elements of that sort of spectrum that you explained that are going to be much harder to do a good job at. It's not saying that it's wrong or right. It's just it's going to be much harder. If you're always in the office, if everyone was in the office, like how do you do asynchronous communication? You could do, but you'd be like, you're right here, so like I'm just going to turn and talk to you. But there's lots of benefits to asynchronous communication where you don't interrupt people and leave messages and things like that. So I don't know. It's it's definitely interesting because you can do something across that spectrum. But I think you're right that to nail like a hybrid kind of thing, instead of relying on chance encounter, like be intentional. And I think that can drive a lot more success with it. So I think like we're starting to do a little bit more of that because, like I said, there's enough people that go into the office reasonably regularly, and I'm new to the team, so like maybe I don't know the schedule, but I've told people going in on Wednesdays. I'm going to start going in on Mondays too. I do one-on-ones with my part of my team on Monday, and coincidentally, they're all people that are in the area. So I've said, hey, I'm going to be going in on Mondays. If you'd like to do your one-on-one in person, like you totally have this opportunity. If you don't, that's cool. Like I'm not forcing you to change your work, but
Yeah.
that's when I'm going to be there if you want to be there. So it's kind of cool.
There's something I was thinking about there, and it's totally gone.
Was it back to like the sort of the stack or the spectrum of different communication styles?
The harder I think about it, the less likely I am to retrieve it.
That's right. That's how it works.
I guess I'm thinking about as someone who manages as a manager, not myself, but any manager managing a team with remote or hybrid aspects to it. I think maybe people don't talk enough about that intentionality, and as a manager, thinking about how to apply it, because I think there's so many like variables that that contextualize how you make that decision. I mean, there's a lot of literature and research that says some of the people who are most like disenfranchised from remote work are more junior team members. Okay. And more junior team members do a lot better in person for whatever the reasons are around osmosis of learning how to like do things from people around you, or like because if you're in person, there's more of that obvious intentionality about pulling someone into a discussion or whatever it is. And so I was just thinking as a leader, what it means to apply some of this. And I think it's really understanding how the different people on your team work and kind of where they're at in their like learning and growth curve. And it's understanding the kinds of problems that you're trying to solve and understanding who your other stakeholders are and how you have to interact with them. And I think there's just so many variables about it, but I think it's really important to really understand that and think about that and apply it instead of choosing a default and always resorting to email or always resorting to calling a meeting, regardless of who it is and what it's about, whatever.
There's different tools for that stuff, right? So it's like if you have an idea about which tools are going to accomplish your communication strategy most effectively, then you can be more effective. But the junior thing is really interesting, right? That might be kind of a cool one to dive into a little more. I know, like, I don't have stats. I wish I had like hard data that I could be like, look, I can point to this and it's real. But anecdotally, I would say, like, especially with interns, juniors, and people being remote in those levels of roles, I would say I find that it's challenging for them to kind of feel like included, to get ramped up. Another chance encounter at the office today, there was an employee that doesn't report directly to me, but was talking to her, and like someone happened to kind of walk up behind her, and she's like, "Oh, this is my sister." And I was like, "What? Like, I didn't know you had a sister, and why is your sister here at work?" But it turns out her sister had an internship or has an internship at Microsoft. So it's like, "Oh, cool. That's so awesome." But her sister was going on to say that she finds, she made a comment about asking questions, right? Like being remote and asking questions and stuff, and that she's been good at it. But she said something along the lines of like, it's starting to wonder if like going to annoy people, like kind of hitting that point where, and it was a trigger for me where I was like, I jumped in and I was like, make sure you keep asking questions though. Like, there's so many junior people that being remote, they don't want to disturb people. Like there's this fear, like everyone is so much more important than me and I don't want to bother them. You got that going on, and then you got this other thing of I don't want to look stupid for asking questions. And then you get this really bad side effect, which is like, guess I better sit here and just do nothing, feel stuck, and be upset. And it's like, it's not the combination of things we want. So it's kind of cool to hear her like having kept up with it and just maybe reaching a point where she's like, I don't know, like it's starting to feel kind of weird. But yeah. Have you noticed any of that with people you work with?
I'm trying to think about it. I mean, I don't have that many, like, we don't have interns right now. We don't have that many junior people, but I guess what I do know is I think like what you're describing is how it kind of raises the barrier to like learning and growth. Yeah. And it's like more lift required from them. And so maybe self-starters do a little better as a junior in a remote environment than maybe people who, I don't know what like a non-self-starter is, but
I've observed that. Absolutely.
Less assertive, less confident, whatever. I mean, think about like you're in a meeting. I feel like in person, I think we've all been in the remote meetings where it's a little hard to understand when to get a word in. And especially if you have like somebody rambly in the meeting, or there's a couple people getting real fired up and passionate or excited or whatever. And it's really hard to understand where your place is. Now imagine being a junior who has a question that's not really going to drive that forward, but actually interrupt it. And people may be like, like, why, like, what, why are we, why are we talking about that? It's just so much harder. And I do understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been something on my mind for a few years now, because the the thing that I've struggled with is, once I started observing this, and again, I'm not saying it's a rule, just a bit of a pattern I have observed, is I started trying to be very, I don't know, like open and communicating, like as people were onboarding, like, hey, please make sure you're asking questions. Like, everyone on the team wants to help you. Like, trying to reinforce this in all the ways that I can. And I've personally found that regardless of how much communication from my end goes into it, that it doesn't make a difference. It seems to be, and you kind of said this, it seems to be that the biggest driver that I've observed is when people are genuinely self-starters. They have a little bit more confidence, they're self-starters, and the the feedback that seems to, and this feels like feedback from other team members, that seems to align with these people doing well as being junior, is that those the feedback is, yeah, that person asked me lots of questions. Like, they're reaching out to me asking questions, and they're doing great. I I don't hear that feedback ever if there's people that I know are having some challenges. I never hear, yeah, they're having some challenges, but they're always reaching out to me and asking questions. Like, it's, there's a very strong correlation there, which I find interesting.
And as a leader, it's harder to identify someone struggling or stuck.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah,
have this kind
I
of
like to give
added element
space.
of, hey, I don't know, I haven't heard from you. Is that because things are okay or not?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was saying. I like to give space to people, but at the same time, it's like, I think I've seen it enough now where I probably need to lean into it the other direction, which is, got a new hire, especially if they're junior. Like, if you're not hearing from them, like, or hearing from a team member that's saying, like, yeah, they're reaching out to me all the time, then it's like, okay, like, jump in there and start trying to be proactive about it and showing them, like, look, this is me reaching out to you to show you it's okay that we can communicate like this. Um, I'm not doing that yet, and I feel like that's probably a thing I got to start doing more.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's too easy. I do this all the time, assuming that not hearing anything means people are okay.
Yeah,
Asking the superficial questions and getting kind of the like "I'm good" response. We onboarded somebody um, fairly recently, really talented engineer. She's not junior, but junior to the team.
sure.
And there was a bit of confusion about some work that was being done, and we were having a one-on-one, and I kind of brought it up, and it was like it took some asking questions and some kind of back and forth, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, you've only been here for 40 days. Like, had anybody walked you through like why we architected like our front end code this way? Like, did anybody take you through, and onboard you like very deliberately to like,
Right.
here's the architecture and here's some of the decisions that were made and why? And she was like, no, I never got that. And it was like, well, then no wonder we had the challenges that we had, and it's entirely not
Yeah.
your fault, and it's entirely my fault, and I didn't like put two and two together that you didn't have that experience. And maybe that was, not a maybe that was a fault of the onboarding plan, but I also just think I wasn't able to see some of the struggle that might have been taking place. There's a difference
Sure.
between, oh, this is taking a little while because the person's new and this is a complex change, versus this person's confused and wading through code, and maybe not able to ask the right questions to get to clarity. Or maybe, again, that barrier to getting that knowledge is harder than pulling someone aside in an office and saying, hey, could you just walk me through this? So
Yeah, like the remoteness. Like, so yeah, I got new people on my team, whether they're junior or not, right? Because there's a range, and I truly like to lean into. I very much maybe to an extreme. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm micromanaging people. So I like to give people space because I want them to know that I'm not like, when I'm asking you for updates, it's if I need a specific update, it's because someone's asking it of me. So like, we're trying to give status updates. It's for some bigger initiative. They're trying to track it, to burn it down. That's why I'm asking. Otherwise, if I'm asking, it's to make sure that you're not blocked and you're good to go. So I like giving people that space, but I am recognizing I do too much one direction because I should be finding a way to more frequently communicate, like, hey, like, I'm asking you about this not because I'm questioning if you're capable or trying to make you feel pressured. It's like, we should be talking about this stuff because I bet you if we were sitting at the office together, you know, we're talking in the morning or something, when you come in, we'd probably say, hey, like, you know, kind of, what are you working on today? Like, it comes up, right? And you would have so many more touch points just to be like, oh, it feels like we're having the same conversation every single day this week. Like, what's up? But you start getting these touch points less frequently, less visibility. And it might all come back to the point of someone just not feeling like they can ask questions. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I would love to continue to work on the skill of asking the right questions and kind of digging in. I find myself often like, anything you need from me? No. Okay. And then, you know, we go through stand-ups and day after day I'm going, kind of sounds like they've been working on this thing for a while, and I'm kind of curious why. And it kind of takes that next, like, takes some effort to get to that next step of like, okay, I know you said like you don't need anything from me. Let me just ask some curiosity questions, and they can't be, do you need any help? Right? What's blocking you? Because they haven't indicated that anything is blocking them. So there's a whole skill to what are the right kind of conversation starters and kind of like inquiries to really get to what you're trying to know.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. Okay, no, I'm curious though. We talked about like modes of communication, right? And we're talking about like the spectrum and being able to, if you want to do hybrid effectively, being able to kind of nail that. But there's this, I guess, like overlay to that, which is like synchronous and asynchronous styles of communication. I'll start this off by saying, when it comes to synchronous communication, one thing that doesn't work for me at all is if someone just calls me. If I'm sitting at my computer and I get a Teams call, like it's just like someone's calling you, immediately I am like, absolutely no. Like, that's not a thing I'm doing. Now, I don't know if I'm weird, so I wanted to kick this off by saying that's my stance on that. Don't you dare call me.
Don't call me. Imagine this podcast was just us calling each other at random times. Hey,
yeah, how good would that be? We should
context.
Do that.
You don't get to know what I'm going to ask you,
and it's already recording. That would be great, right? So you just get the call, and it's like you got to jump on
while you're in traffic.
Yeah, that's
the. So there's definitely a variance between people of how much they prefer that type of communication or not. And I don't even think it's not a Boolean, like I like calls or I don't like calls. It's kind of certainly a spectrum. Even on my team, we have a variety of different communication preferences, from, hey, first kind of wink, I get that there's something to be talked about, there's a huddle call, versus hey, I would prefer you give me, you know, a bunch of context up front to process and kind of think and understand about before I engage in any kind of conversation about it, kind of everything in between. So I don't think you're not weird for that reason.
Fair, yeah. There's other reasons, yeah.
But I think what is, I think there probably is, man, I hate the term best practices, but I think there are some like practices that are better than others given certain types of context and certain like inputs.
Sure.
Like
I think
certainly,
that's a fair statement, though. Yeah.
I think there is, but I also often struggle because I want to counterbalance that with like situational leadership and making sure like I'm meeting people at their preferred communication style as a leader when possible.
Yeah. That's a good point, though, right? Because we could look at just the technical implementation of communication, right? And the different modes we have, the purpose it should be serving. And then you have to balance that with there's literally people on the other end of that communication that have preferences. And where do those match up, right?
Yeah, you can nitpick and dissect like best communication practices, but that only makes sense like if the person at the other end is like receptive to it and not like, oh
exactly.
God, I hate everything about this, so let's just not, which is the alternative. For sure. Yeah. I'm starting to identify tools that I never used before or didn't maybe understand the true power of. And I'm really trying like not to, be like over like evangelizing, like things have to be better and I know the better way. But I am starting to try and look at other things beyond just what some of the individual preferences are and letting some of those win. So an example, I've been embracing like recording short Loom videos.
You mentioned Loom videos, yeah, and I didn't ask you, but now I'm going to ask you. What are you using Loom videos for? What's going on with that?
I've known of the tool like for a long time, but I was always like, whatever. I don't do demos, or I don't know what the excuse was, but it's just kind of like whatever. I don't need it. Like, it's just another tool to capture screens, whatever. But what I've actually been trying to lean into it more for is, hey, there is something that is, I'm going to say like, might be assumed to be better synchronous in that like it is better to show or talk about than write up in a document or an email. And the temptation might be, let's get everyone on a call to like show this thing, or let's get the right people we need in to demonstrate a bug or whatever it is. And actually, I just talked to Loom like I am talking to the person. And I anticipate the questions that they'll ask or whatever. And I record the video and I can share my screen and they can see my face. So they like, there's some context cues about what my emotion is about this, whether it's excitement or I'm pissed off or whatever. And they can see what I'm kind of working through. And then what's really cool, and it sounds like I'm pitching this tool. I think there's many tools that do it. Just Loom is a big one. We're
not sponsored by Loom, but
like,
if
I don't
Loom
care.
is listening.
Use whatever. Yeah, we could be. Please, I'm limited to 5 minutes, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But what's really cool is you can comment on the video at specific times, and you can like emoji react to the video at specific times in the timeline. And so someone can pause and say, based on what you just said, something, something, something. And then other people who watch the video, those comments like pop up while they're watching it. And it kind of sparks like a discussion.
Kind of like if you had a document that someone wrote up and you were reading through and people leave comments, but this is a video.
But it's a video, so they've seen it instead of having to read it and kind of maybe like understand something that might be easier if you vocalize it. So it's not always perfect.
Sure.
But I had to give an update to leadership on some progress on this dashboarding tool we're implementing on our data warehouse. And I could certainly have written that. And I think it would have been like, I think people either would have glossed over or been like, I don't really understand, or like, okay, great, but not necessarily really understand the real impact and power of what we had. I recorded a 2.5 minute video and I shared it with leadership, and I got more responses to that video. Actually, leadership and like my team, some people hadn't seen what I was demoing. As it took me 2.5 minutes. Now I had to do 2 takes because I screwed it up. So it took me more like 10 minutes. But 10 minutes, and people, I think 2.5 minutes is a good amount of time for people to like grok something without it being super interruptive. You can drink your coffee and watch it. And I got responses like, wow, it was really cool to see the power of this. Or what was really interesting was someone said, I love how fast you were able to do that, which demonstrated the value of the thing I was demoing by me being able to demo it. And so it was really effective. And
but you made an interesting point though, right? Because this type of thing normally, again, it's not a plug for Loom, but this is something that we traditionally, we go, man, people really, they would benefit from seeing this. Like they would benefit from hearing me talk about it and seeing it. So let me schedule the meeting.
So we have a call.
And these people, yeah. So and we're in different time zones, and the next time we're all available is a week from now. So like, we will wait 1 week to schedule the thing so that we can have the best type of communication.
Right. And imagine you're trying to get quick feedback on this thing. A week's gone by before anyone's even been able to like get eyes on it. Or you could like, I don't know, whatever, give them access and let them explore, but then you can't, like, there's so many reasons why I think there's some power to it in the right circumstances. Also, depending on what you're recording, if it's more of an inform than a discussion, there's a couple benefits to that as well. Like it can go into a library, and now it could become onboarding materials if it's relevant there. It could be a historical record if it's relevant there. Like so many reasons.
That's really interesting. I know, man, I'm trying to think back because it's been a long time since I've seen this, but I feel like at Magnet, when I was there towards the end, I feel like more people were starting to do like, especially for like bugs and stuff, right? It was like, I'm going to literally record my screen so that I don't have to like basically pull you out of what you're doing. We have to find some time together, walk through it, reproduce it. It's just like, I'm right here. I can repro it and like on my computer, it's busted, right? And get it recorded and just be like, here you go. Like we can you get asynchronous communication with this sort of media that typically feels like it must be synchronous. So I think that's a really cool thing to lean into. And I personally have not leveraged that kind of thing at all. So it might be a good opportunity.
It's neat that we sort of organically started to do it right around the time I got excited about it. And maybe some of it I was inspired by team members, but our UI UX designer, she will have a new thing to show. And like, we can all log into Figma and look at the design file, but that's very different from her giving the context of like, let me walk you through the design and the decisions that were made about it and like why it works this way and how I expect like interactions to work. Way different. And
otherwise, you have to interpret it. Like you're looking at it and you have to interpret it. And there could be some value in it being like not explained to you and how obvious it is. But I feel like a lot of the time that's not necessarily the goal. It's like a lot of the time we are trying to pitch things. Like I have a perspective or an opinion about something and I'm trying to present it to you. And if you don't have that context, then you're kind of like, I have to guess at what the person is saying or meaning.
Yeah, and in this case, the specific example I'm thinking of, we had a meeting about the design because we do design reviews, and she was able to ask like, did everyone get a chance to watch the video? Great. So you all understand the premise. Now let's dive into like the questions and like the engineerability of this instead of let me spend the first part of the meeting walking through and aligning everything and everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, really cool. I also, developers on my team will record to say like, hey, I implemented this thing, and there's a few avenues it takes. Like, I just built this thing and I'm putting it up for code review, but I wanted to show it working. Or I just built this thing and I'm about to put it up for code review, but we have to make some like little decisions about implementation or design. And instead of pulling PM and like UI UX and engineering leads or whoever into a room to talk about it because they want to progress, they will record a video and say, let me walk you through the problem or the decision that needs to be made and share that out. And they get an answer back likely quicker, and a discussion starts quicker than if we had to go find time on everybody's chaotic calendars for what is a really short demo and discussion.
Yeah, the calendar part is, I feel like that kills a lot of momentum, but it's hard because you're in a situation where you're like, I want to bring in these other stakeholders. I want to get their feedback. I want to show them this information. And so you have to go find the open spot. You have to schedule it, because like what you don't want to do is leave out the important people, because that's the whole point of why you're trying to communicate. So, yeah, no, that's really cool. I haven't done that before, and I feel like that's, well, okay. This leads me to sort of like another question, right? Because I'm sitting here going like, I should do that. That sounds like a good idea. How do you navigate? You got this situation where there's people that want to communicate in different ways, and if you tell people like this is the only way to communicate, kind of thing, like how do you balance like having a team of people that may want to communicate in different ways and allowing it all to happen? Like, do you say, hey, we don't send this kind of stuff over email or messages, like, or do you just kind of let it happen and it's a free for all and we hope it's good?
I think that's a really good question, and I think communication norms can be difficult and complex.
Sure, yeah.
I also think a former coworker of mine, someone I really respect and helped me early in my management career, is co-founder of a company that's doing really, really well right now. And one of the things they did that I really envy but have not been able to replicate is they published communication guidelines for their organization, and they actually published them publicly to say these are our communication guidelines because y'all might find interest in it. But it's very clear. You use email for this, you use Slack for this, you use Wiki for this, and they share screenshotted examples in this public guide that they wrote where one of the co-founders says something in Slack and an employee says, hey, we actually prefer this kind of thing to be discussed in email for the following reasons. And they can point to the guidelines and go to somebody who is like of more seniority than them and say, look, Slack is the wrong place for this. We don't talk about discussions that require like documented detail and nuance in Slack because it disappears or it's lost in the ether, whereas we use like email for that. And so I have seen it successfully prescribed, at least in Ashby's
case. That's very interesting. Yeah.
For sure. Maybe that works better if you're like a new small organization and people agree to it, and then as you grow, it kind of ingrains itself in the culture versus trying to show up to an established organization that's been running for 10 years and say, okay, we're going to communicate this way. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not the expert.
Well, I'll give you an example. I work in Office 365, and basically it is about Exchange email server. And you can imagine the people that have been at Microsoft for a long time, their primary mode of communication is email. I have over 80,000 emails in my inbox right now. So if I had to show up and be like, guess what, folks, no more email for this type of thing, people would look at me and be like, get out.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to what you're saying, right? If it's maybe a little bit more early, smaller, or even if you try it within a team or something to start and kind of expand, it could be interesting. Now,
your question was about how does this do you let this organically form?
Yeah.
Where there's you have
just people mashing communication together, right? So like if everyone's using it in different ways, do you just allow it because it allows individuals to communicate the way they want? Or by allowing that, does it become so chaotic that people are like, I don't know where to find information because there's nothing consistent?
I know that is the tough part. My default often is kind of using the free market philosophy of the things that are most valuable will win. So if people demonstrate and see value in recording videos, maybe that starts to become part of the culture, because they see, those of us recording videos get more engagement and faster responses than people who schedule a meeting a week out. I don't know. I think where you can't let it be free for all is you might start demonstrating times when recording a video is useful. You probably don't want me recording videos in Loom Stacy recording videos in Zoom video recorder, right? John recording videos in Bugsnag, and just have that's probably not gonna work. So I think maybe there is some hey, kind of use the tool that is being used. But I think we certainly haven't made any efforts to mandate this kind of problem. You'll use a video and this kind of whatever. What I think is happening is my team and one other team that I know of are just starting to kind of lead by example some of the things we would prefer about efficient and effective communication without necessarily prescribing. So things like that we're starting to get a little bit more passionate about and trying to demonstrate the value in is meetings have to have agendas. It's strongly encouraged that meetings have a pre-read document so that they are more about discussion than about spending synchronous time getting aligned. So there's a lot of pre-materials for scheduling meetings. I think meeting length defaults are really neat. Hour should be the exception. Half hour should be uncomfortable, and 15 to 20 minutes should be kind of the default. It's actually funny. We use the G Suite, the Google Suite stuff, and you can set your own personal setting for fast meetings, which I think by default makes 20-minute meetings instead of 30, or 25 instead of 30, and 50 instead of an hour. So people get breaks between meetings and whatever, which is really great. But I wanted to set that at the organization level, and you can set the default. So when you click new meeting, what the default meeting length is, but you can't set this fast meeting setting by default. And it's so frustrating because it's something we really wanted, so that when people are booking meeting rooms, it forces a 10-minute break instead of meetings being back to back, and then they go over and then you fight for the room. Anyway.
That's never happened before, has it?
No. At a previous organization, we had one of those offices with all the glass meeting rooms everywhere. And we had a pretty good culture about booking meeting rooms. And I remember there was this weird thing where my team was, you stand outside the meeting room and do the hover and the passive aggressive, hey, it's our turn. And I remember there was a meeting going on, and I walked up and my team members were doing the hover, and I was like, what are you doing? Get in there. And they're like, oh, the co-founders are in there. And I was like, we have this culture of we booked a meeting room and we have to have this meeting, or do we just not want to build this thing that we're building? Is that not important? And so I just opened the door and was going in. People were
I feel
shocked.
At Magnet, there were situations where there would be people pretty high up. I don't know if I ever walked in on, the co-founders, the CTO or the CEO, perhaps, or they were in line of sight with me and they saw, and it was enough to they're kind of looking and being oh, and I feel there was a lot of hovering, but I feel at least towards the end of my time there, I feel we were getting closer to being look, you want us to get stuff done? We need these rooms. There's only so many rooms. Now, they moved to a new office that probably addressed a lot of that. But, I feel people were starting to take it more seriously, because it's extremely disruptive when you're we needed to meet, and you're holding up an entire team of people because they can't meet for some of those meetings, retrospectives and stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, which was a funny side tangent, but what is relevant, when we talk about efficient communication and efficient use of time, another thing that I'm trying to role model, and I'm not doing the best job at it, is ending meetings on time.
Yeah.
And not just going over because we have more to talk about, because I think that shows that there wasn't enough diligence put to what the outcomes of the meetings were expected. Because in theory, if you have 10 minutes left, you should at least be able to drive to next actions, whether it's further discussion or whether it's assign things out to people to go make progress on, instead of if you're all just chatting and trying to synchronously work this thing out, and every meeting feels like that, and it's gone over an hour to an hour and a half. I think there is something to be corrected there for sure.
Yeah, it's totally fine to have an action that is, we need to basically go out, collect more data, and come back and talk again. there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you make a good point that when meetings start to take shape like that, it's probably an indicator that like we're not doing a good enough job of setting up expectations for what that meeting is. So the other thing you said that I really like, and I'm not there yet personally, is this like the prescribed way to communicate. I don't know if the word extreme is right, but that prescribed way to communicate that you were talking about, I was like, I think that sounds really cool, but I just don't know if it works like in practice. And what you had said was that you're starting to come up with more things like guidelines about the different ways that are effective to communicate. And I like that a lot because it seems to be like, I don't like rules that are hard because I think there's always exceptions. And then it's like people are like, but it's the rule. And instead, it's like, no, these are like guiding principles. So if you need to break the rule, so to speak, like there's probably a good reason you're doing it, I would hope. And that's cool. Like it's not the end of the world. So I don't know. Like I like that idea a lot because you're putting conscious effort into thinking about what should be leveraged because it is more effective, and if we align on it, like it will become even more effective versus people just kind of doing everything willy-nilly.
Yeah, we have like it's not bad. We have some amount of contention about what the right mediums are, and I think it varies from maybe team to team and individuals' like historical experiences. That's fine. But there has been a consistent ask for guidelines and recommendations for uses for tools, even across some of that, like some of the like contentious boundaries.
There's been an ask for it.
Yeah, people say, well, you know, I would like to understand some guidelines about when it does make sense to communicate certain ways. I'll give you an example. Okay. We kind of all agree that one of the most difficult forms of communication is like Slack direct messages because it's asynchronous, but it's very limited. It's one-to-one or one to a couple, depending on if it's like a group DM or an individual DM. But it's just like, I really prefer and have tried to foster a culture of like communication happens in the open.
Yeah.
But as a Slack admin for my organization, I get a weekly email on our stats, and we are about 5% of communication in Slack happens in public channels, and then it's like another
everyone's
like
talking bad about you. They're saying this
like
guy's trying to make us
in private channels, so maybe that's like some of that. And then, but honestly, it's like it's consistently over 85% communication in direct messages.
Very interesting.
Which is pretty wild, because I struggle to understand like how much of that is necessary. And what's extra interesting is I would say not a massive majority, but there is definitely like a faction or a group of people who are new to Slack and really don't enjoy it for its distractedness. Like, hey, like puts like all these alerts. It's easy to like miss things. It's easy to misinterpret the urgency of something because it puts an alert in your face, and so like this feels urgent, but actually it's technically supposed to be asynchronous and like not. And so there's all these reasons why people struggle with it, especially in DMs, and yet that's the like primary mode we use. So it shows me, hey, people are asking for these guidelines, and there's data that kind of tells me it's needed to move the needle in the way we communicate. But again, we wouldn't say you don't use DMs.
Sure.
But we would say it's generally preferred if you can ask questions in team channels, because it's likely that more than one team member can answer your question. Yep. Or it's likely that other people need to know the information that you're asking. And so instead of it being repeated through a bunch of different places, it should just be out in the open in a relevant channel. So stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. I think an example I have of that from my previous team was for when we're doing like investigations, whether it's a live site incident or just debugging an issue. The system that we have is pretty complex, and there's a lot of like legacy and historical reasons for things. Like I've probably mentioned it to you or like in recording, like I think some of the code that we're deploying in those situations, like older than people on the team, like
Right.
kind of wild to think about. So when you're digging into some of this stuff, the medium for it that we agreed, because this is one example where we're like, hey, we should do something about this. We said we should put it in an email. We should basically not just have it in the chat.
Well, you love email.
Everyone just loves email anyway. So, but one of the reasons that it's helpful is that like it's going to be archived in email. People can search for it. Like next time there's a problem, like with this service, with this pattern, whatever it happens to be, you just type it into Outlook and like, or a part of it, and you get something that's familiar. So, that was the preferred way that was suggested. Certainly, like you could start the conversation in chat, like if you were investigating it, and then, or you might be doing the live investigation in chat or whatever is most effective for you to be doing that, especially if you're collaborating, right? If it's chat on a call, you do your live investigation the way that you want. Find what works for you. But then follow up with the team so they can all learn. And we said put it into an email for that so it's archived. And then on top of that, we were saying like, if there's enough of these, people can kind of vote and we can have a meeting and you could basically walk people through. You've already documented it, but you could walk them through so they have more context and they can ask questions and stuff. So I feel like that was a really good communication pattern because like the team came together and they were like, yeah, like this is what would work really well for us. It is isolated to our team, so it's not like we had to go convince like half of Microsoft or something to go agree to some standard. So just one example of where that really worked to make things more effective. It's not easy though, right? You mix in the cross geo stuff and preferences, like it's almost like there's not a single right answer. You and I can't sit here and talk about this and be like, by the way, everyone, like, here's step one. Just like you only use email for this. You stop using text messages. Like, there's just going to be so many situations and differences for teams that are going to make things more or less effective.
And for me, more than anything, I just want people to understand and respect the amount of effort that they're asking from other people.
Yeah.
I think that's like a pretty important for me. So there's situational leadership and me stepping into, the way people want me to communicate with them. But what I hope from people, and I have a few expectations. One of them is just like, it's not even, it's nitpicky in that it kind of falls a little bit in the like effectiveness bucket. When you're crossing time zones, like I am constantly trying when I do have to schedule meetings to make sure it's not on East Coast lunch hour. It's not on West Coast lunch hour. It's not like super early morning for East Coast and West Coast. And I think like the reason that I think that falls in the efficiency or the effectiveness bucket is because when the inverse happens, and I can say I'm a recipient of it, and I'm not trying to like,
I was going to say, you've told me that you've had situations like, I don't even know which jobs in particular, but you're like, man, that's my lunch hour. And like, that's the only time I literally have. Yeah.
Every day. And it's just like, because guess what? It's like, it's open on my calendar and it's a good, convenient morning time for people on West Coast. And so it looks convenient. And if you're not thinking about the difference, but what's inconvenient for me is I've been in back to back to back. I haven't gone to the washroom. I just want to eat some food. I'm not really going to be effective in your meeting.
Yeah.
I'm mad. I'm hangry. I don't know. So that's like a small piece, but I think also this idea of, well, we need to get together and talk about it. Let me find some time on people's calendars. And I just go and I see an open slot 3 days from now where I can get everybody together for half an hour. And I put a thing in that says, discuss the thing we were discussing in Slack. And I'm like, okay, now I am stalled and can do nothing to help with this or contribute to this until we have this meeting.
Yeah.
And the first part of the meeting is going to have to be, let's get on the same page about what the goal is. What are we even talking about?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that to me, if you feel that it is necessary to have everybody physically present or virtually physically present, I think that the responsibility is on you to set that up for success and efficiency, and you have to drive that. And it's not, well, we'll just get in a room. Like, just getting in a room doesn't solve anything. There has to be some structure, and whether it's like intentional structure or you make it happen in the meeting, it's going to be necessary. And I just think, like, we have people across time zones. We have people who have their schedules where some people are busier at different times of day. Everyone has kind of open minutes. Why wouldn't be leveraging that time? Why wouldn't we try and leverage that time to give people a chance to contextualize, think about, come with solutions, instead of saying that's going to happen in this 30-minute box 3 days from now, because it's not.
Yeah, because that's exactly it. Because it's not. Like, if we're just being honest with ourselves, it's truly not. Yeah, that you said it really well though, but when I reflect on, like, I talk relatively often about differences I've seen in like big tech and startups and stuff. And obviously, like, these are generalizations. You can't, I don't like saying every, this is exactly how it is, but the idea of, hey, we're talking about something now, there's currently context, but we should get together to change the form of communication, which I think it can be a valid statement to say, like, what we're doing right now, if we're just chatting about it, like, we probably need to have a conversation. I think that's a totally valid thing to say. But the thing that I observe a lot in, especially like Microsoft in particular, because that's where I work, is this thing of, okay, well, when's the best time we can all get together? And it's a week out, it's 2 weeks out. And I'm going, but when you said it, it was just so obvious, where I'm like, yeah, man, like, that is absolutely ridiculous. And we do that. And if I think about a little bit earlier, because one of the takeaways for me as we were chatting through this was, like, using a video to record something and just do it and get in the habit of doing that, to me is like, it almost sounds like a no-brainer. Like, why haven't I done that? I think it's because I'm not used to it, but that could solve a lot of these inefficiencies that I'm experiencing. And I could be the person that's like, hey, look, see how cool this is? See how pain-free this was? Maybe aside from hearing my voice, but it seems like it would help a lot.
It's one technique, and it's I'm excited about it because I've, like, seen some really, really good uses of it recently. I think there's also some research now. It probably came from, like, a Loom marketing page, so there's always that grain of salt. But I think there is some research about the difference in emotion evoked. Let's say, like, a leader wants to do an update email or a newsletter, whatever. Sure. A roadmap review, a retrospective, sending an announcement to the organization and to a group is actually, like, proven to be much more effective and, like, emotionally engaging if it's a video with the exact same content in it. And so there's just also that bit of power in, hey, this feels connected, right? I'm not, like, reading a document and applying a tone and applying like context cues that are missing. It's like, I see it, I hear it, I can see the excitement, or I can see the frustration. And I think that's just, like, I really get that. And I've seen that based on my experience engaging with videos that others have made. So I think that's cool. Plus, you can watch them on, like, 1.2 or 1.5 or 2 times if you feel like listening to someone like speed walk through.
The like... 2x speed is a life hack for sure. That's I think I need to make my YouTube default that. It's wild. The even more wild part is when you go back to 1x speed and you're like, what is wrong with this person? Because it sounds so slow. It's painful. You're when like, you realize you've been talking to or listening to people. Yeah, you've been listening to people at 2x speed, so you're the weird one. But yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It kind of does. Yeah. It happens naturally if I just pound a couple of coffees first before the video.
That's right. Yeah, I've been going at 2x speed my whole life.
Yeah.
No, that's super cool though. Like I said, I think that it's a really interesting takeaway for me because I'm hearing it and being like, I want to do it, but I need to make sure that I can put it into practice, because it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it.
And I think remembering that there is, it's new and shiny and there is some value to it, but I think there's plenty of tools about writing documents people can engage with using diagrams instead of just writing a document. I think one additional for me that just I was reflecting on as we kind of summarize is just one of the drivers that pushes people out of things like a threaded conversation in Slack or Teams is when it gets a little bit chaotic and multi-threaded and people are like, whoa, like this is getting really confusing. We have to talk about it. You don't really like talking about it itself doesn't make it any clearer, right?
Sure.
Talking about it physically is the same as continuing the thread, but via a different medium. What I actually get really excited by is people who are really good at recognizing that is happening. And instead of trying to say, let's change it up and get in a room, they're really good at, let me take everything that I've read and like collate it and summarize it and try and like bring this thread back to some clarity. And I've said this before, but it's the job of a senior person wherever they are on the like ladder. The more senior you are, the more it is your job to reduce the chaos and drive to clarity. And that can be through recording a video and a demo to try and give extra context. It could be through writing a document, or it could just be through taking that thread and really bringing it back to focus instead of knee-jerking to, well, we have to do that in person. You really don't. I think that someone organizing that meeting is de facto taking the role of forcing to drive the clarity, but you can just do that asynchronously too. So,
yeah, no, that's an excellent point. It's and you have said it before, right? It's reducing the chaos. So I think it's an interesting point that there was a different tool for it. We always have this tool in our mind, which is get on the call, but like you could be, and you should try it. You could be equally as effective, perhaps, if you just try to summarize and bring people back on the same page. So that's another really good takeaway, because I know I definitely fall into that other category of like, I will say, like, especially I'll see emails and I'm like, I think we need to talk about this. And like, that's work, but it means, it's take it offline. Well, take it online? I don't know. I don't know which way we are. But yeah, it's like, we're going from email and then I'm scheduling a call that's a week out. And it's like the call, don't get me wrong, the call I feel like ends up being more helpful than trying to just go back and forth over email, which is like people slowly arguing with each other.
Right.
It's like, we know this isn't right, but the call maybe still could be better if, I don't know, it could be, let's start a chat and just like summarize it in the chat. Now we can have a little bit less, or maybe a little bit faster reply times. There just might be other things we could do without resorting to something very distant. Because I think that's one of the big issues I have with pacing in larger companies.
Well, it doesn't happen at just larger companies, so there you go.
Fair. No, that's cool though. I think a bunch of stuff to think about there, because it's easy to say like we have all these tools for communication and we just use them and like not think twice about it. Like whatever people are talking, like it's clearly working, but like, is it actually effective? And I think that's good to think about.
Yeah. Clearly I'm a little bit passionate about it, probably because it's a thing that I feel is like within reach for increasing effectiveness, at least across my team or the teams I work with. So, but even just talking about it today reinforced some of my thinking about it. And then also kind of brought to light some areas where maybe I could think a little more broadly and apply some of the stuff that I kind of like you said, it's easy to say, but yeah, try and kind of make a habit out of it. So
yeah. Cool. No, that's awesome. Like I said, I think I have some things I'm going to try. So as always, thank you so much for the insights. And for folks that are listening or watching, if you want to do us a favor, like, subscribe, do the fun stuff, leave comments below if you think you have the secret to communication that we should be practicing.
Or book a meeting.
What's that?
Or book a meeting with us.
Book a meeting in 3 weeks with us. Yeah. Or if you do happen to have the one strategy for communication that rules them all, let us know, because love to hear it. But Graeme, thanks again. And folks, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.